Chapter 284. Whenever the Death Knight tried to swing his sword, it felt like something kept getting tangled up in his movements. As a result, he wasn't able to wield his sword the way he wanted to. It was as if this kid, Vermouth's descendant, was reading his mind and preemptively blocking the trajectory of his sword. He must be good at prediction, the Death Knight guessed. Just how far ahead is he looking? This couldn't be just an innate sense he had been born with. Instead, Eugene's prediction was based on experience that had been accumulated and tested over time. The Death Knight had never expected that, in this era of peace, there would be someone as adept at fighting as he himself was. He had heard from his master that barely any wars had been fought during these past 300 years. This isn't good, the Death Knight assessed soberly. It wouldn't matter if the only opponent he had to deal with was just Eugene Lionheart, but there were still the 3 Tower Masters of Aroth standing behind him. The saint of this current era, who so closely resembled a niece, wasn't an existence that could be ignored either. The Death Knight carefully considered his options. If I use ignition, will I be able to kill them all? His corpse, which had been made into a Death Knight, no longer possessed a beating heart. However, there was still a core in his chest. Although this core was composed of dark power instead of mana, it was still possible to amplify his own strength by deliberately overclocking his core. If he used ignition, he would be able to generate so much dark power that even an undead body like his wouldn't be able to withstand it. So he would still have to deal with the recoil. However, it wouldn't just be the kind of recoil that would leave him unable to move his body after using ignition like it had been while he was alive, nor would it reduce his lifespan. Instead, the more dark power he explosively generated, the more this undead body of his would deteriorate. Teached, the Death Knight clicked his tongue and furrowed his brow. The sword he was using to combat Tempest's windstorm was crumbling right before him. The Death Knight threw away the sword that was no longer usable and covered his hands with dark power. He then condensed this dark power between his palms to create a black ball of explosive force. Boom! The explosion managed to briefly blow away the windstorm. In that short opening, the Death Knight's right hand had been covered by his sword force. Unlike Eugene, the Death Knight didn't have any friends to guard his back. Things were different from his previous life. He didn't have any comrades who could fight at his side, shield him from the front, support him from behind, or take care of his wounds. Yet he didn't feel disappointed by this realization. On the contrary, this undead body of his, which had been revived after already dying once, was capable of performing much bolder feats than what he could have dared to attempt while he was still alive. When you're just trying to make great content at bit.ly/3ibfjv. The Death Knight first protected his whole body with a shield of dark power, then plunged straight through the slash now flying at him. He might have been able to block the windstorm with the previous explosion, but that hadn't done anything to block Eugene's sword. Purple flames danced along with the movement of Eugene's hands, tracing the trajectory of his slash in a fiery blaze. Ruhr, the armor of dark power covering the Death Knight, was shredded by the flames. A line was also drawn across its undead body. At that moment, the Death Knight's hand disappeared as a blade of dark power struck Eugene from outside his field of view. Eugene wasn't surprised by this. Attacking from outside the opponent's field of view while sticking close to the body was a tricky technique that Eugene had made good use of during his previous life. So WNYD easily blocked the blade that was flying out of his blind spot. At the same time, his other hand reached out in a different direction. Tisk! The Death Knight clicked his tongue in disappointment as he stepped backward. Eugene's other hand had caught the dagger that the Death Knight had thrown when he thought that Eugene was distracted. The target of the dagger had been Christina. The Death Knight had wanted to take the chance to kill the owner of that disgusting appearance. "This bastard, you really are seeing right through me," the Death Knight complained. Since his attacks kept getting blocked before they could reach their target, the Death Knight couldn't help but feel annoyed. Was it because his body was still a bit stiff? After all, he had just opened his eyes after 300 years of lying dead, and it had been a long time since he had experienced a battle of this level. The difference in the quality of their weapons couldn't be denied either. Sponsored content. If he wasn't a Lionheart, I might have even praised him with a pat on the head, the Death Knight thought regretfully. To be honest, this fight left him with very complicated feelings. The Death Knight had left no heirs during his lifetime. He had never taught anyone how to use the sword. Even though he had died before he could pass them down personally, after 300 years had passed, he had still managed to meet a successor to his techniques. The problem was that his successor was Vermouth's descendant, and the things that had been passed down to this kid were the skills that Vermouth had stolen without his permission. Because of how Vermouth had betrayed his trust when he was alive, this whole situation caused the Death Knight to feel even more furious and enraged. These emotions led his steps, which had been drifting backward, to advance once more. The Death Knight felt regret that he had only brought one blade to this battle. If this were the battlefield, he would have been able to find usable weapons from his surroundings, but all that was present here were dirt, gravel, and trees. The fortunate thing was that this body, which had been revived as an undead, was extremely tough. The Death Knight spread both his hands in a loose stance and lowered his body. There was no sound from the Death Knight's feet when he started charging forward. His fully lowered stance seemed to slide across the ground effortlessly. Then his loosely spread hands swung forward like whips. Eugene hadn't moved a step. He was standing in the same spot as before, with WE being the only thing showing slight movement as it rose in defense. The Death Knight didn't choose to clash with Eugene directly. The moment he reached the defense Eugene had erected with WE, the Death Knight twisted his body to the side. His swinging hands avoided the blade and struck at Eugene's neck. Even now Eugene still didn't move. Instead, the ground that the Death Knight was stepping on began to churn. In mere moments, the distance between them abruptly expanded. Yet instead of pulling back his swinging arms, the Death Knight spun his entire body around. During this spin, his nails, which had been lengthened with dark power, swiped at Eugene. In response to this attack, Eugene finally took a step forward, even though the distance between them wasn't all that large in the first place. Yet this current arm's length between them wasn't a gap that either Eugene or the Death Knight were uncomfortable with fighting in. Cyan watched the battle between Eugene and the Death Knight with an expression of undisguisable astonishment. Both kept firing off attacks without showing any signs of retreating. Without being able to touch each other, the two of them launched continuous waves of assaults. There was no way to tell just how many moves either of them were predicting in advance. The moment that one of them was forced to be distracted by an attack coming at them would be when the other seized the flow of battle. Both Eugene and the Death Knight kept pressing forth with their attacks to seize an advantageous flow in their battle. Before too long, the gap between them began to emerge. Eugene's sword was lighter than the Death Knight's fists. As a result, he was ever so slightly faster than the Death Knight. So, at some point, the flow of the battle began leaning towards Eugene. There was no way that the Death Knight wouldn't be able to sense this happening, but his head was throbbing in frustration. The battle techniques he recalled weren't working as well as he expected. It feels like my body isn't moving as well as it should, the Death Knight thought in distress. But that had to be an illusion. His body, which had been raised as an undead, was actually moving better than it had when he was alive. After all, that body had been damaged by the frequent battles and extreme overuse of ignition to the point of self-abuse. His body may have once disintegrated, but it had been restored out of nothing through the authority of the Demon King of Incarceration. Although it had been perfectly restored in its final damaged state, Amelia Merwin had remodeled the broken body to have higher specifications than Hamill had once had in his prime. My head, the Death Knight thought with a wince. Could it be because of an incompatibility between his body and soul? No, that couldn't be it. Edmund himself had lent his own expertise to fine-tuning the Death Knight. While his existence as a whole might not be natural, that didn't mean that the rate of compatibility between the body and the soul was low. But if they fought in the exact same way, there was no way that the Death Knight, who was relying on memories from 300 years ago, could win against Eugene. After all, Eugene was all too aware of how the Death Knight would move and how he would launch his attacks. Yet at the same time, Eugene no longer thought and fought the same way he had 300 years ago. Sponsored content. It had been 21 years since he had been reincarnated as Eugene Lionheart. He had first set his sights on reaching the heights of his previous life, which had seemed far into the distance at that time. Now those heights were no longer so high nor so distant. So the movements of the Death Knight couldn't escape Eugene's eyes. It was only the Death Knight himself who refused to admit to this fact. His head kept throbbing in pain as he tried to think of a way to win, but the memories being drawn from his body were already flowing into its head all too perfectly. There was no way to improve his absorption of Hamill's skills. Rather than that, the memories associated with those skills were practically forcing themselves onto him. So there was no shortage of techniques at his disposal. As for his former strength and speed from when he was alive, That was just a matter of replacing his usage of mana with dark power. In the end, this still meant that he was lacking something decisive needed to win this battle. And whenever it came down to situations like this, Hamel would always. The Death Knight's right hand, which had just been blown back from a parried strike, twisted back downwards. The bent fingers of the Death Knight's hand headed straight for his chest. He had to use ignition. If he was the slightest bit careless, his undead body would break down, but things such as the recoil seemed insignificant for the Death Knight at this moment. The Death Knight was filled with hatred for the Lionheart name. Eugene's fiery mane reminded him strongly of Vermouth, and he also claimed to be Sienna's successor. Then there was the Saint who looked exactly like Anise. The Death Knight didn't want to admit to their strength. Instead, he wanted to squash them in a head-on conflict. Only by killing all of them would he be able to resolve this suffocating and terrible hatred in his heart. His dead fingers dug into his unbeating chest. The Death Knight's own rage was injected into the dark power of the core that lay there. Eugene naturally recognized what this gesture signified. He just never thought that the Death Knight would still be able to use ignition with its undead body. If Eugene had his way, he wanted to defeat the Death Knight while using the same technique of ignition. But it seemed like there wasn't any need for that. Fwoosh. Purple flames began to gather behind Eugene's back. Crack. Then came the sound of something shattering. Christina, who was standing behind Eugene, covered her mouth with one hand, but she couldn't seal it off completely, and blood soon flowed out from between her fingers. Melkith turned to look at Christina in alarm. Lovelian immediately made a gesture with his hands and started casting a spell. Balzac also flattened his body and placed one palm on the ground. But it was useless. They couldn't do anything to stop the intrusion of Edmund, who was drawing on the mana from the earth veins, Vladimir, and even the dark power granted to him by the Demon King. Through sheer force, Edmund broke through the barrier of divine power that had been erected around this location, and he also immediately tore through the barrier spell that Lovelian had just cast. Balzac Ludbeth, Edmund thought with a twitch of his brow. To think that his fellow black mage would actually interfere in his plans like this. Balzac's clever penetration of his own defenses was more irritating than the solid barrier of divine power he had just destroyed. However, it seemed that he wasn't too late. "What is this?" the Death Knight spat out as it suddenly fell from midair. Tearing his eyes away from his hand that had been set on fire by his own enflamed dark power, the Death Knight looked around at his new surroundings. Whether it was the descendants of Vermouth, the Saintess who so resembled Anise, or the archwizards who followed Sienna's tradition, none of them could be seen. He had been on the battlefield just moments ago, but in an instant he had returned to the capital of the Coachella tribe. That wasn't something you could overcome with force, Edmund lectured. When Eugene had just been about to cast his signature and the Death Knight was on the verge of activating ignition, Edmund had used the summoning spell he had obtained from Amelia to pull the Death Knight back here. But doesn't that just give you a little more motivation to grow stronger? Edmund said as he turned to face the Death Knight, his furrowed brow relaxing. He had been surprised to see a saint whose magic was lethal to the undead. There had also been 3 Tower Masters from Arath. Sponsored content. Then there was Eugene Lionheart. He had known that Eugene was strong, but to think that it was to such an extent. Edmund clicked his tongue and shook his head. Plong. The attack that came flying at him was blocked by Edmund's defensive spells. As he gazed through the hazy barrier, Edmund narrowed his eyes. Motivation, the Death Knight growled, his expression twisted into a demonic grimace. As his body shook with rage, the Death Knight spat out. "So what? Are you saying you sent me there to motivate me?" "It wasn't just that," Edmund replied. "If at all possible, I hoped that you would be able to kill everyone there. But regretfully, it seems that was impossible." "Impossible? Don't spout such bullshit. If you hadn't summoned me, I would have been able to kill them all," the Death Knight insisted. "Would that really have been the case?" Edmund questioned in a calm voice. The Death Knight immediately opened its mouth to give a response, but unsure of what to say, he remained silent. Instead, the Death Knight eventually restrained his current surge of rage and closed his mouth. "I can't say that for sure," the Death Knight admitted once he had finished calming his raging emotions. When it came to combat, the Death Knight knew that one needed to be rational. He shouldn't allow his emotions to take precedence. Even though this was already something that he should know all too well, this time he hadn't been able to put it into practice. After considering the matter, he felt that it couldn't be helped. Eugene Lionheart was Vermouth's descendant, a successor to Hamel and Sienna's legacy and the hero. While chewing on that list of eye-catching titles running through his mind, the Death Knight shook his head. If I had kept on fighting, I might have been able to kill a few of them. However, killing them all would have been impossible, the Death Knight conceded. That wasn't a situation wherein I felt I could afford to lose you. Edmund continued speaking. After all, you don't want to be defeated without getting your revenge on all those who wronged you, do you? It's just that the battlefield this time wasn't advantageous for you. Now your motivation has been strengthened, and I've also confirmed who our opponents are. Next time I will also be able to provide you with my assistance. The Death Knight just listened silently. How do you feel now? Edmund asked. The Death Knight was no longer planning to attack Edmund. He stood there completely still while reliving the battle that had just taken place. Is the current me truly in the right condition? The Death Knight asked. I know that my body is healthier than it was before. Probably, if it's with my current undead body, I'd likely be able to keep up in a slugfest with that fool Molan. However, I still couldn't manage to gain the slightest advantage over that brat. Instead of replying immediately, Edmund was lost in thought for a few moments. He knew the reason why the Death Knight felt that way. The Death Knight firmly believed that he was Hamel. He didn't have the slightest hesitation or doubt about calling himself Hamel. However, even with that, this didn't mean that the Death Knight was the true stupid Hamel. He was just a doppelganger who was perfectly mimicking Hamel after being implanted with Hamel's memories from when he was alive. Amelia Merwin believed that once the doppelganger could fully adjust to these memories, it would be able to recreate everything about Hamel, including his personality. To do so, the doppelganger needed to go beyond simply relying on those memories and instead needed to digest them. Amelia predicted that only then would an independent sense of self be born, and a new soul would come to dwell within the Death Knight's body. Amelia had loaned the Death Knight to Edmund, partly because she expected a favor in return later, but also because she hoped that experiencing the battlefield might allow the Death Knight to go beyond being a simple mass of memories and sublimate a true self. But such a possibility, while there might still be some hope for it, it doesn't seem too likely. I'm skeptical as to whether it can truly go beyond the limited nature of its existence, Edmund thought doubtfully. Unlike Amelia, Edmund didn't really trust such uncertain possibilities. The only thing Edmund believed in was the things he had perfectly designed. From that perspective, the Death Knight had plenty of room for growth. Sponsored content. However, truthfully speaking, Edmund was skeptical about whether a doppelganger, who was just a mass of copied memories, could truly be reborn as a higher class of being like Amelia hoped it would. Of course, it was impossible for him to confess such thoughts to the Death Knight. Once Edmund had finished his contemplations, he spoke up. It seems that you are being overly influenced by your memories from your past life. He decided to give the Death Knight a bit of encouragement while keeping his words moderate. It's something that cannot be helped. You were once a human and died as one 300 years ago. Now you have returned to life, but you were not resurrected as a human being. The Death Knight silently processed this. Edmund reassured him, since you have been dead for hundreds of years, your soul and memories may be incomplete. However, there's no need to be too concerned about it. To my best knowledge, Amelia Merwin, the one who resurrected you, stands at the peak of all necromancers. She is also an existence incomparable to the necromancers you may have encountered 300 years ago. Your words leave me with a complicated feeling, the Death Knight complained. Edmund laughed. Your instinctive disgust towards black magic may also be contributing to your current discomfort. You asked if you were in the right condition. Well, if I had to be honest, you're not. The Death Knight glared at Edmund without responding to his revelation. Without averting his gaze, Edmund smiled and continued, you could describe it as a characteristic that all ancient undead experience. They are repulsed by their current form of existence and become obsessed with the memories left from their former lives. But that said, that doesn't mean you need to give up on all of your past attachments. Because for the undead, their obsessions can be said to be the foundation of their very existence. The more Edmund talked, the calmer the Death Knight's expression grew. However, you should focus on the motions instead of your memories, Edmund advised. Instead of relying on the countless battles you went through during your life, you might find the answer to your current distress by coming up with new ideas. The Death Knight slowly nodded his head. That's certainly true. Perhaps it's because I've been revived after dying once that my head doesn't seem to be working too well. Now that I think about it, I was fighting the way that I always did during my previous life. My past experiences take over whenever it comes to fighting for my life. However, the battles I face now are different. I can't allow myself to be swayed by my memories. It seemed that the Death Knight's pounding head was gradually clearing up. I should have been thinking about how I should fight, instead of letting habit take over. The fact that none of my tricks worked on Eugene Lionheart means that he must know me all too well. So my defeat is because I couldn't go beyond his expectations. The Death Knight continued to mutter as he turned around. In the end, wouldn't that also just be acting according to the habits from his past? That was what Edmund thought as he looked at the Death Knight's receding back. But it was clear that his conflict with Eugene Lionheart, who was much stronger than either of them had suspected, had managed to motivate the Death Knight. Although the Death Knight couldn't gain the upper hand on Eugene in this battle, if the Death Knight had been able to use ignition like he had said, the results might have been different. However, this still isn't a good turn of events, Edmund thought as his expression reverted back into a frown. He had been planning to finish his preparations at a leisurely pace, but he could never have imagined that the Lionhearts and the Tower Masters of Aroth would actually arrive to interfere with his plans. Though the truth was, more than anything else, it was Balzac Ludbeth's presence that caused Edmund the most aggravation. What does he want? Could it be, he plans on stealing control of my ritual? There was also one other thing, they also had Raizakia's hatchling with them. Did she manage to escape when the Dragon Demon Castle fell? Was Eugene Lionheart involved in that fall? Edmund kept thinking about what the hatchling's presence could mean. He knew that the rainforest retained a connection to the dimensional rift Raizakia was trapped in. The wise sienna must truly be secreted away in the elven territory hidden somewhere within the rainforest. Eugene bringing the hatchling here must have something to do with that. The fact that the wise sienna hadn't been seen in over 200 years meant that she had to be in a state where she had no choice but to stay unseen. Edmund had dared to use the rainforest as the stage for his ritual because he was confident that Sienna had been sealed away. While he had failed to find the world tree himself, he was hopeful that once the ritual was successfully completed, he would be able to devour both the world tree and Sienna's power for himself. That was why he had wanted to make as complete preparations for the ritual as he could. But, having confirmed the presence of the hatchling Eugene and Balzac, Edmund could no longer afford to be so relaxed. Edmund was afraid of two possibilities. One was that he would lose control of the ritual to Balzac. The other was for the wise Sienna to be resurrected before he was finished. Whichever way things went, Edmund would only end up with the worst possible outcomes. It seems that I can't afford to relax, Edmund breathed out with a groan. Chapter 285. Balzac Ludbeth 5. The mana Eugene gathered to activate prominence dispersed. Eugene glared at the sky for a moment, then cleared his expression and regained his composure before turning around. He noticed Christina wiping blood from her mouth with the back of her hand and asked, "Are you okay?" The barrier she formed using divine power had not been weak by any means, but it had been no match for the sheer power of Edmund's attack. Christina had endured the brunt of the destruction, her barrier shattered by the force of the onslaught. "I am fine," Christina said while catching her breath and calling on the light. The throbbing pain she felt was washed away by her divine power. But even though she was relieved of the physical pain, she could not find peace. "I apologize, Sir Eugene. I was lacking." "Don't say that." Eugene interrupted her with a nonchalant expression. He didn't want to betray his true emotions to Christina, especially when she had such clear blood stains around her face. However, his answer only caused Christina more distress. Christina lowered her head while chewing on her lips. Eugene clicked his tongue at the sight and pulled out a handkerchief before approaching her. "He's called the current generation's staff of incarceration. In addition, he was drawing power from all sorts of sources. Even if you are the saint, you couldn't possibly maintain the barrier under those conditions." "Right. Hamel is correct, Christina. Even for me, it was impossible to suppress the staff of incarceration by myself 300 years ago." It felt as if the curses and hatred they felt from the Death Knight were haunting them. However, Anise could pull herself together, knowing that the Death Knight wasn't really Hamel. "How dare they?" spat Anise, but it did not mean she had dispelled her anger. On the contrary, her anger simmered beneath the surface. sharpening into a fine edge. Anise could not bring herself to forgive the Death Knight and the Black Wizard who had created it. The mere thought of their actions made her blood boil. They had taken Hamel's body and turned it into a twisted puppet, a mockery of the man he had once been. But that was not enough for them. They had gone a step further, imbuing the Death Knight with false memories and forcing him to pretend to be Hamel. The insult was unbearable not only to Anise but to everyone who had known Hamel 3 centuries ago. Lovelian raised his head, revealing his pale expression. The Red Tower was known to be specialized in summoning magic, and as the master of the Red Tower he could claim to be the greatest summoner of the era. And yet he had failed. Lovelian had attempted to cancel the Death Knight's reverse summoning, but he had failed to interfere with the enormous power Edmund utilized. Please take a look at this. However, it wasn't as if he had failed to produce any results. Although Lovelian had been lacking in mana to directly interfere with the summoning, he had succeeded in tracking the flow of the mana in the brief moment. Lovelian raised his staff, causing the fabric of space to distort and ripple around him. Then with a wave of his hand he projected a scene before him. It was not a powerful familiar he had summoned but an eye that would allow him to observe Edmund's actions from afar. Though the distance made it impossible to conjure a more powerful entity, observation was possible. All eyes were drawn to the projection as it flickered to life before them. The image displayed the capital city of the Coachella tribe, a place that lay far beyond their current location. Despite the distance, the view was clear, offering a panoramic vista of the city from high above. The sight that greeted them was brutal and cruel. Before them stood a massive pyramid-shaped altar, its size looming over the countless prisoners that climbed its sides. At the pinnacle of the altar, a group of sorcerers stood, their masks and clothing made from human skin. In their hands were long winding knives, which they plunged mercilessly into the chests of those who reached the summit. It was a brutal ceremony, one that involved the live extraction of the prisoners' beating hearts. The prisoners stumbled and rolled down the pyramid after being robbed of their hearts into a large pit located below. Within the pit were piles of bodies easily numbering in the thousands. Even after the hearts were removed from the bodies of the prisoners, they continued beating. Nearby, warriors stood at the ready, adjacent to the sorcerers, poised to receive the still beating hearts. They carefully carried the organs to the back of the pyramid, where a large cauldron waited. The cauldron was woven from the bones of the dead and contained a boiling, sticky, crimson liquid. When the beating hearts were thrown into the pot, they instantly dissolved, the crimson liquid turning even darker as it mixed with the organs. "How terrible," Melkith muttered with horror at the sight. Cyan chewed on his lips to stop himself from throwing up. He wasn't too accustomed to seeing so many dead bodies. But there wasn't just one altar in which such a ritual was taking place. In fact, there were 5 such altars in the capital of the Coachella tribe, and the shape they formed was clearly visible looking down from a great height above the capital. It was an inverted pentagram, a symbol favored in black magic since ancient times. "Don't you think it's rude to peek?" A voice came from the scene. Lovelian moved his magical eye with a stiff expression. A man was flying towards them, dressed in a fedora and a short cloak that seemed entirely out of place in the hellish landscape below. Edmund Codrith smiled while caressing his beard. "It's not Balzac's dark power. The head wizard of the Red Tower. Lovelian Sophies? It must be. I saw the head of the White Tower, Melkith Elhaya, as well, but she's not proficient in this kind of magic," continued Edmund. "And what do you know about me?" Melkith grumbled, but it was true. Melkith was proficient in many different types of magic as an archwizard, but as Edmund said, she wasn't a master of summoning magic, which required one to be both spontaneous and delicate. "First of all, as someone who walks the same path of magic, I would like to offer you my compliment. It's amazing that you managed to detect the flow of magic in that short moment and even summon a familiar despite the difference in our powers," said Edmund. "I don't want to hear your compliments," retorted Lovelian. "Is it because I am a black wizard? I know your childhood was ruined by a black wizard, but, well, let's stop talking about this. You all will never see eye to eye with me anyways." Edmund paused, then turned his gaze away from Lovelian. "However, I think we are more than capable of understanding each other. What do you think, Balzac Ludbeth?" Naturally, Edmund's gaze was directed at Balzac. Although the two locations were separated by a great distance, The cold anger contained in Edmund's eyes was thick enough to protrude through the projecting images. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I always thought of us as friends. We've known each other for a long time and we've talked about many things, said Edmund. Think it over, Edmund. We've certainly talked a lot, but wasn't it mostly useless chatter? I think most of it was perfunctory, retorted Balzac. That's upsetting to hear. So, are you betraying me since most of our exchanges were useless? Asked Edmund. I think you have the wrong choice of words. It's not betrayal since I was never on your side to begin with. Just as you move only for your own benefit, I also move for my own benefit, Balzac responded softly. His nonchalance caused Edmund's eyebrows to wriggle with discontent. Are you planning to rob me of my ritual? Asked Edmund. Perhaps, answered Balzac. I know you well, Balzac Ludbeth. You don't have the capacity, retorted Edmund. Do you really think so? Balzac asked, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Edmund did not respond. He couldn't find anything to say. In truth, he barely knew Balzac at all. Edmund couldn't describe the type of wizard Balzac was. He was confident in describing Amelia Merwin, but he couldn't say the same for Balzac. Before signing a contract with the Demon King of Incarceration, Balzac had been an excellent wizard, hailed as a possible successor to the position of the Blue Tower Master. Then one day he suddenly left the Blue Tower and headed to Helmuth. Countless wizards had attempted to gain an audience with the Demon King of Incarceration, but few had succeeded in even entering the imposing Tower of Babel, let alone laying eyes on the Demon King himself. However, Balzac was different. His reputation as a talented and respected wizard had preceded him, and it was this that had granted him access to the Demon King's inner sanctum. However, it would have been difficult for him to obtain a contract with the Demon King with nothing more than his abilities as a wizard. Rather, it would have been impossible if only his capabilities had been taken into consideration. At that time, the Demon King of Incarceration already had Amelia Merwin and Edmund Codrith. Even so, Balzac succeeded in signing a contract with the Demon King. What he desired through the contract had caught the interest of the Demon King of Incarceration, but Edmund did not know what it was. That's how the three mages of incarceration came to be. There were exchanges. However, their interactions had been limited to surface-level talks, with little insight into each other's thoughts and intentions. Balzac's magical abilities appeared unremarkable on the surface, but it was clear that he had hidden depths. To truly understand each other, they would have to engage in magical competition. However, they had never taken this step. How utterly unpleasant, spat Edmund, all traces of a smile disappearing from his face. Since you're saying so, let me make it absolutely clear for you, Balzac. The ritual I preside over is perfect and not pathetic enough to be taken away by the likes of you. Balzac did not give an answer but shrugged instead. Edmund's glistening eyes headed to Eugene. It will not break and I will not fail. Eugene Lionheart, I know that you are the hero and have caught the attention of His Majesty the Demon King of Incarceration. However, if you think I won't kill you just because of that, you're sorely mistaken. And you think you can kill me? Asked Eugene as his lips curled into a twisted smile. The blade you sent was dull and old. Do you really think you can kill me with such a weapon? Your anger and disgust are blatant. Is it because you're not just a Lionheart but also stupid Hamel's successor? Let me correct you first. It does not matter to me whether the sword is blunt or sharp. I am not so weak as a black wizard to be desperate for a blade, retorted Edmund. Should he induce them to march all the way to the capital of the Coachella tribe? Edmund could not be defeated if he set this place as the battlefield. The large and cruel city had long been Edmund's territory, and it currently contained a great concentration of power as the epicenter of the ritual. But his opponent would surely be aware of this fact as well. Edmund wasn't in a position to relax since he was ignorant of Balzac's true purpose. Edmund would have plenty of time to make preparations while he waited for his enemies to march. Likewise, his opponents would also have time to prepare. He didn't know what kinds of tricks Balzac had hidden up his sleeves, and the two Tower Masters bothered him as well. To make matters worse, the two in question were wizards who specialized in war among the arch-wizards of Arath. The Red Tower Master could fight a war of numbers with his summons, while the White Tower Master could make use of numerous spirits with her contracts to two spirit kings. Even if I make this the battlefield. If the wise Sienna also joins the fray. However, what worried Edmund the most was the possible resurrection of Sienna. Although he never had the chance to compare himself to Sienna as a wizard, Sienna Meridian was an archwizard who even threatened the Demon Kings. He was confident in beating her in a one-on-one battle of magic on an advantageous battlefield. But if the wise Sienna joined the group of his powerful enemies, he judged that his odds were slim. "So I will kill you all with my own hands." Finally, he came to a decision. He would leave the capital and march, raising a decisive battle to supplement the remaining offering required for the ritual. He did not know how much time the opponents would need, but one major war would be enough to satisfy the requirements for the ritual. "I will march the barbarians to the footprint of the god of the land right away. If you want to run away, feel free to do so." "I'm willing to show that much mercy," said Edmund. The group had pinpointed the location of the footprint of the god of the land by studying the map the previous day. The valley was situated between the Coachella tribe and Zoran tribe and was the only place in the dense forest that lacked trees. According to the beliefs of the native Samar people, the Hollow Valley was a footprint left by the god of the land and was considered a site for the great tribes to engage in large-scale battles. In fact, it had been the site of a fierce battle a few months ago when the Coachillas and Zorans first clashed. Edmund's words were a blatant inducement. A pagoda of bones had also been erected in the footprint of the earth god, and the earth veins were also twisted. Even so, facing him in the footprint of the god of the land was still better than marching all the way to the Coachella tribe's capital to face him there. The images became blurred, a consequence of the magical eye being destroyed. Lovelian clicked his tongue while shaking his head. "It's as you said, Black Tower Master." Edmund's hurrying to finish his ritual. He had declared his intention to march even though there was no need. Edmund's eagerness to provoke his enemies into marching to the footprint of the god of the land was a clear indication of his desperation to complete the ritual at any cost. He seemed unwilling to tolerate any hindrances or unforeseen circumstances, and the group sensed this from his bold declaration to march toward them. Balzac observed Eugene's expression closely while muttering to himself, "He's trying to hurry it more than I expected, but I can guess why. He's wary of Sir Eugene's existence, as well as Lady Sienna's resurrection." Although Balzac had not heard directly about Sienna's resurrection, he could deduce from their current situation that it was related to her whereabouts. If Lady Sienna is free, there is no reason for her not to have joined us. It seems that other conditions need to be met for her resurrection. Balzac turned his attention to Rhaenyra. Although he was never told her identity, it was blatantly clear that the little girl was a hatchling. That death knight from before. Was it really Sir Hamel? Sion asked while massaging his pale face with his hands. "I don't understand why he would have said any of those things. He wants to wipe out the Lionheart clan? Why would Sir Hamel say such?" "No," Eugene spat out. "That death knight. The body belonged to Sir Hamel, but the person wasn't Sir Hamel." "And how would you know that?" asked Sion. "I would because I'm Hamel, you punk." Eugene barely stopped himself from retorting. Well, now that he had come this far, it wouldn't be problematic for him to reveal his true identity. However, on a separate note, Eugene thought he might kill himself out of shame. He had always spoken of Sir Hamel's greatness to Sion, but if Sion ever found out that Eugene was Hamel, well, spirits can see the souls of humans. Tempest told me that the Death Knight wasn't Sir Hamel, Eugene hurriedly explained. "Are you sure?" "He kept saying that he was Sir Hamel," said Sion. "Why would I lie to you about this? And I'm sure you wouldn't know, but Sir Hamel's not an idiot like that Death Knight. And like you said, why would Sir Hamel want to massacre the Lionheart clan? What reason would he have to curse Sir Moulin, Lady Sienna and Lady Anise?" continued Eugene. "Maybe he got angry after discovering the contents of the fairy tale?" Melkith whispered under her breath while listening to their conversation. Christina's shoulders suddenly trembled, a result of Anise suddenly clearing her throat. That's a valid argument. Even Eugene had to acknowledge it. Sienna and Anise were co-authors of the fairy tale, and they had never imagined that Hamel would reincarnate when they wrote the story. In fact, when Eugene first read the fairy tale after reincarnating, he had ground his teeth. However, he would never curse Sienna and Anise over a fairy tale. How could he? Now that he had the opportunity to mull over it with the luxury of hindsight, he had to admit that his death in the castle of the Demon King of Incarnation had been a selfish suicide. He had chosen his own death after realizing his body was broken, and he could no longer fight. In truth, it was a way to preserve his pride while going out on his own terms. He had hoped that his comrades would become furious at his death and topple the demon king of incarceration. Despite whatever excuses he could come up with, in the end, his death had been ugly and selfish, and Eugene had to admit it as a fact. What Sienna and Anise did with the fairy tale could be considered trivial compared to what he had done to them. Though I wish they had seasoned it a bit less with their own self-interest. Eugene shook his head, recalling the way in which the fairy tale ended. Sir Hamel isn't so shallow as to curse his comrades for the contents of a fairy tale, said Eugene. How would you know? Asked Melkith. How would I know? I just know it. After all, I am the heir of Sir Hamel, successor of Lady Sienna, and I met Sir Molan as well. I heard from them exactly how heroic Sir Hamel was, explained Eugene. Christina, how can Hamel say such embarrassing things with his own mouth? I think that Sir Eugene is great at self-objectification. By goodness. Christina, you're clearly blinded by something here. Anise screamed, causing Christina to blush slightly. Honestly, that Death Knight isn't worth worrying about. I can handle it just fine on my own. Rather, I find it more annoying that Amelia Merwin, the master of the Death Knight, is colluding with Edmund, Eugene said. Edmund only borrowed the Death Knight. Amelia will not be coming to the forest, replied Balzac. How can you be sure? Asked Eugene. Just as Edmund is wary of me, he will also be wary of Amelia. In the first place, Edmund is using the warriors and sorcerers of the Coachella tribe as a tool without receiving any help from other black wizards or demons. Pulling off such a large ritual without receiving any help is a great feat, but he's not doing so to show off his abilities, but rather, to eliminate all possible variables, Balzac said with a bitter smile. If Amelia had cooperated with Edmund, this ritual would have been completed already. If Edmund is a well-balanced black wizard, Amelia is a necromancer who stands at the pinnacle. An army of undead would not have needed any supplies or rest. I hate black wizards, but I hate necromancers the most among them. Eugene spat out, recalling the face of the Death Knight. Chapter 286. Balzac Ludbeth 6. News of the declaration of an all-out war at the footprint of the god of the land was relayed back to the Zoran tribe. The elders of the tribe took on stiffened expressions at the news, but the young warriors seemed rather welcoming. It was because the location held significant meaning for them. It seems that the Coachilla's no honor, said Ivatar with a grin. The footprint of the god of the land had long been used as a stage for wars to decide the fates of the great tribes. Although it was true that the god of the land would guide the spirit of the warriors, regardless of where they perished, it was also true that a warrior who died in the footprint of the god of the land would lie in the cradle of the warrior in their death, in the arms of the god of the land. Ivatar's father, the former chief of Zoran, had fallen in battle against the Coachillas, succumbing to injuries sustained during their conflict. The battleground for their fateful encounter was the footprint of the god of the land, a sacred place that held great significance to the natives of Samar. Ivatar, fueled by his warrior spirit and driven by a desire to avenge his father's death and reclaim the souls of their fallen warriors, was determined to emerge victorious in this upcoming battle. At the dawn of departure, the warriors of the Zoran tribe and their allies gathered together for a solemn ceremony. At the heart of the capital, a temple was set ablaze, its flames reaching for the sky and spreading heat upon all those gathered. As the warriors readied themselves to depart, they each cast their personal belongings into the fiery inferno, accompanied by the sorcerers who added a mixture of potent herbs to the flames. As the herbs incinerated, they produced smoke. The warriors who inhaled the smoke screamed or danced. Although the hallucinogenic herbs used were treated as a drug in many parts of the continent, for the natives of the rainforest it was a common and accepted practice, a vital part of their preparation for battle. The preparation for the upcoming battle wasn't limited to just burning herbs. The warriors were also provided with alcohol, although the taste was unpleasant. The liquor had been infused with psychedelic substances, which would allow the warriors to forget their pain and fear. Eugene's group did not participate in the raucous ceremony. Each of them was busy with preparations of their own. Christina was at the water reservoir of the city, unleashing her divine power. It wasn't anything new or special for Eugene. He had seen Anise do the same thing many times 300 years ago. She was making holy water on the spot. If the psychedelic plants would rob the warriors of their pain and promote madness, the holy water would treat their wounds and clear their minds to bolster their courage. Eugene himself had relied on the holy water many times in his past life. If I knew this was going to happen, we should have brought some priests from Eurus, grumbled Anise. Mass-producing holy water was her specialty, and she was sharing Christina's body while providing guidance. In Eurus there was a group of priests known as the Luminous Covenant, a group of battle clerics. After the night march, the Pope had formed a special force within the Luminous Covenant with Christina as their leader. The Special Forces group, known as the Graceful Radiance, was formed from priests personally selected by Anise and Christina. Although the group wasn't yet officially established, the battle priests of the Graceful Radiance had begun their training under Rafael Martinez. Although I had my standards, they are still brats who don't know anything about war. Even so, they could have lent me their divine power, so if we brought them here, it would have saved me a lot of trouble, said Anise. She knew that even with her vast array of miracles, there was a limit to what she could do for her allies. The saint's divine power was powerful but not limitless. If she could borrow power from other priests, however, the possibilities for miracles were endless. Anise had earned the moniker of Hell among the demons, for the mere presence of her on the battlefield made it almost impossible to slay humans. Her divine powers were unparalleled, allowing her to perform miracles beyond the capabilities of other priests. The radiance of her light was all-encompassing, and wherever it reached, the wounds of her allies would miraculously heal, and they would become invincible. It was ironic, in a sense, that she could transform humans into living undead with her powers. However, this time around she would not play as big of a role. The natives here did not believe in the god of light. As a result, Anise looked pale and exhausted. It was because she had poured out her divine power by repeating her prayers with minimum rest. I won't care about the death of the natives, Anise said while taking a large swig of alcohol. But contrary to her words, Eugene knew Anise wasn't one to let anyone die. Yeah. Why bother saving them? It'll only be burdensome for you. Just let them die, responded Eugene. Anise glanced at Eugene after hearing his response, slowly massaging her stiff temple. What a horrible thing to say, Hamel. I guess that's the kind of person you thought of me as, said Anise. On the contrary, I know you too well and I trust you too much. Anise, we both know it'll be the same this time as well. I can't even imagine you being indifferent to anyone's death, responded Eugene. His words were evidenced by her actions. Even though she was complaining and grumbling, Anise continued to make holy water. She was doing so on behalf of Christina, who was exhausted. Anise Slywood hoped to save all humans. She sympathized with those who died in the terrible times of the past. The dead will become a sacrifice for the ritual in this war. If too many of them die, it might complete the ritual, so I should make sure that doesn't happen. Anise whispered under her breath while standing up. She felt slightly dizzy, possibly from exerting too much divine power in a short period. But she wasn't tired to the point of collapsing. Her legs felt slightly weak and she was a bit lightheaded, but that was it. She could maintain her balance, but she chose not to. Are you okay? Asked Eugene after immediately coming to her aid. Instead of giving an answer, Anise allowed Eugene to help her. However, she didn't feel that it was sufficient. Anise wasn't the only one who thought so either. She felt Christina's emotions, then with a wry smile, slightly retreated back, allowing Christina to take over. Ehem. Anise leaned her head against Eugene's chest, wordlessly seeking comfort in his embrace. Eugene felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment, knowing full well that Anise enjoyed this kind of physical contact. Though she had not acted like this in their previous lives, her current mischievous and greedy behavior was likely influenced by the fact that she had already experienced death once before. Eugene knew why she acted like this. I think this much is fine, muttered Anise. Was it really Anise? For a moment, Eugene couldn't be sure. It had never been difficult for him to differentiate between Anise and Christina. Even if they shared the same face and the same voice, there were minor differences. But it was hard to tell right now. When this war is over, you will go to rescue Lady Sienna. I believe you will be able to save her, Sir Eugene. It was Christina. I am grateful that Sienna is not dead. I would like to see Sienna. However, I can't help but think that I can be by your side, Hamel, right here, right now, because Sienna is not here. It was Anise. I know it's not right for me to think this way. I know I should not be having such thoughts. However, I can't help myself and I get absorbed in it. Then I end up feeling guilty and miserable. Hamel, I know you were more conscious of Sienna than me. From a long time ago, I was nothing but a piteous comrade. You saved me, Sir Eugene. I wanted to believe that I would have been special to you. The reality made me miserable. I knew the truth but didn't want to admit it. Even so, I was happy because it felt like I was chosen by you, Sir Eugene. I tried not to become greedy as I stayed by your side. No, I tried to settle by following behind you. Christina's and Anice's voices quivered. I could not be satisfied. Hamel, I do not know what you saw me as, but I am a selfish woman. I cannot be satisfied by simply looking at you by your side. I am afraid. I am frightened. When Lady Sienna is resurrected and returns to your side, Sir Eugene. At that time, could I still stay by your side like now? Can I still look at you as I do now? I did not want to leave behind any regrets. At first, I tried to settle for a first kiss. I thought I was used to holding myself back. But I wasn't. My heart and greed only grew bigger and it's slipping out of my hands. When Lady Sienna returns, The quivering voice trailed off. Christina felt disgusted and ashamed. Anice could not bring herself to look up, thinking that her sincerity was simply ingratitude. There's no way that anything will change with you two just because Sienna comes back. Eugene felt pity at her trembling shoulders. At the same time, he also felt confused. Anice's heart? He knew about it since she could not have made it more obvious. He had also guessed the same about Christina. However, he had never imagined that the two of them were conscious of Sienna in this way. To be honest, I don't know what Sienna will be like. However, there's no way I would look at you differently just because Sienna returns, said Eugene. That means... She raised her head. It was clearly Anice. Although he did not doubt the tears that brimmed in her eyes, Eugene could also feel a crafty snake behind her eyes. Sir Eugene, can I take that as a sign that you have me in your heart as well? But before Eugene could respond, Christina added her tearful plea, making the weight of her words heavier than even Molin's fists. Eugene felt overwhelmed and tried to take a step back unconsciously, but a hand firmly held onto the hem of his clothing, preventing him from moving away. He couldn't tell whether it was Christina or Anice who held him in place. Even if Sienna comes back, I can keep doing this, right? If Lady Sienna treats me like a thief and tries to harm me, will you stand in the way and protect me? Wait. Anice, even if Sienna returns, you're free to do as you please. Well, actually, I don't think you would change just because Sienna returns, Eugene scuttled on. And, Christina, I don't think Sienna would treat you like a thief, and she probably won't try to harm you either. Well, if she does try, then of course I will protect you, but... shouldn't we talk more about this after Sienna returns? What a trashy thing to say with a handsome face. Hamel, you are trash. The same accusation came from the same face and same voice. Eugene trembled with a red face. What the fuck do you want me to do? Eugene felt that their words were unjustified. Both Christina and Anice stared at Eugene, embarrassed and helpless with narrowed, thin eyes. It caused stagnant tears to flow from her eyes once more. I'm saying this in case you misunderstand, Sir Eugene, but these tears are real. I'm not the only one who cried either. Lady Anice cried first. Christina. It's better to admit these things, sister. After saying so, Christina leaned against Eugene once more, embracing him. If you don't know what to do, just don't say anything and hug me. Eugene lowered his awkwardly positioned arms around Christina's back. He had thought Christina's personality had become rather loose because of Anice, but he could no longer think so. Come to think of it, Christina had shown a subtle, insidious madness from their first meeting that set her apart from Anice. I can feel you shivering. I often thought about this, but you are quite cute. Is it you, Anice? I wonder who it is. The saint smiled without giving a proper answer. Afraid of discovering the truth, Eugene quietly patted her back. Cyan had drank only alcohol, not wanting to use the hallucinogen. However, he was having difficulties falling asleep. After tossing and turning for a long time, he eventually sat up with a long sigh. The scene he saw earlier kept on playing in his head. There had been too many dead bodies and beating hearts being removed as sacrifices. Such things were too terrible for Cyan to accept. If you're scared, you can just stay here. A voice came from his side. It was Eugene. He was busily fiddling with Akasha, absorbed in something. Cyan pressed his fingers against his temple as he turned his gaze toward Eugene. Eugene was sitting on the floor and next to him was Rhaenyra. She was curled into a ball, sleeping. She had been struggling to stay awake due to a nightmare that plagued her mind, but Christina's divine magic had managed to lull her into slumber. "Are you still doing that?" grumbled Cyan instead of answering Eugene's question. He knew what Eugene was up to. He was trying to create space inside the cloak of darkness that could house Rhaenyra. Since dragons could survive on mana alone, Eugene was attempting to isolate a subspace inside the cloak to create a place where Rhaenyra could stay. It wasn't an easy feat by any means. He had to meddle with the cloak of darkness, which was already a finished artifact, and alter the existing magic imbued into the object. Since Rhaenyra could not utilize high-level Draconic as a hatchling, Eugene had to complete the task himself. "You could just ask Sir Lovelian or Lady Melkith for help," said Cyan. "They're both busy. And this is mine, so I should do it on my own," responded Eugene. "Didn't you technically borrow it from Lady Melkith?" said Cyan. "Technically yes, but it's essentially mine," Eugene answered with a shameless expression. It was true that both wizards were busy. Lovelian was working on a combination of summons for the upcoming war while Melkith was away from the capital. It was so she could attempt to make a contract with Ifrit in the spirit-filled, man-dense forest. Eugene was trying to modify the cloak so that he could protect Rhaenyra. He couldn't leave her here or anywhere else. Since Edmund had discovered her existence, it was entirely possible that he would try to take her if she were left alone. "I'm telling you, if you're scared you can just stay back," Eugene repeated himself while looking up at Cyan. He was almost done with the cloak. Cyan hesitated without giving an answer. Although he was born into the Lionheart family, a family of warriors, he did not know war. It wasn't just him either. For the people of this era, war was only a vague concept. It wasn't just war either. Cyan had always been a skilled fighter, able to take down monsters and demons with ease. But he had never killed a human before, and the thought of it weighed heavily on him. He had never been fond of the Samar natives, but seeing their lifeless bodies scattered around him had shaken him to his core. He would see many more corpses in the upcoming war, and he knew he would be responsible for some of it as well. "Killing people isn't a good experience," Eugene said. Cyan remained silent. Eugene had such experiences. You had died at Eugene's hands as well. If possible, it'll be better to never experience such things for the rest of your life. "How did you feel when you first killed someone?" asked Cyan. "It didn't really feel like anything," Eugene answered with a nonchalant expression. "It was a situation where I had to kill them, and it was someone I had to kill. If I didn't, they would have killed me. What was I supposed to feel? Guilt? There was nothing like that. I guess I was thinking along the lines of, 'That's what you get, bastard,' or something similar." Cyan laughed after hearing Eugene's answer. "That's just like you," he commented. "What about you? How do you think you'll feel?" asked Eugene. "Wouldn't it be something similar? It's a war, so it's natural that I have to kill someone to live. Those bastards will be trying to kill me as well, right?" said Cyan. "Well, I suppose so, but there's still no need to have to experience something like that." "I'm the next head of the Lionheart family," answered Cyan. "Now that I know about the ritual, I won't step down. This all stemmed from the Lionhearts. From Ued. As the next head of the family, I will take responsibility. I'm obliged to get involved. I have no intention of putting you in charge as well. You've matured, brat. I get that you might be a little bit more mature than me, but I'm still your brother." "I'm not much younger than you," said Cyan, shaking his head. His words weren't addressed only to Eugene but to himself as well. "I didn't want to say this because I thought it might put you on a pedestal, but I think you'll make a better head than I thought," said Eugene. "Huh. Don't say the obvious. I have been trained for this ever since I was young." "I was faithful to the training too," replied Cyan. "I think you have me to thank more than Lady Ancilla," said Eugene. "And what did you ever do for me besides beating me up and cursing at me?" Cyan spat with embarrassment, preparing himself for a smack from Eugene. But contrary to his expectation, Eugene only smirked. "You shouldn't die with your skills, but try to be careful." "Don't get hurt," said Eugene. "Speak for yourself." "I'm being serious. Be careful. Lady Ancilla will try to kill me if you get hurt anywhere." "Like I said, worry about yourself," grumbled Cyan before lying down. There were many things he could not understand. He didn't know how Eugene could be so calm. Regardless of how strong he was, this would be Eugene's first time participating in a war of this size. But that's more like you. Cyan felt reassured that Eugene would be fine even in a war of this size. Cyan could not imagine Eugene getting hurt or falling down. He knew that he needed to be careful, knowing that he could be a burden to his brother. Even so, he wanted to be Eugene's equal. That's what it meant to be brothers. If you think about it, I'm the older brother. But he knew voicing the complaint would only result in a smack. Such thoughts helped calm his mind. He remembered how Eugene had faced the Death Knight with malice and killing intent. No matter how scary the war was, he didn't think it would be as scary as angry Eugene.